Somebody calling Jack?
I am. Voicemail box. Got his voicemail.
Good evening. We are now resuming the Kalamazoo City Commission meeting, which was started on Monday, August 17th, and which was recessed prior to its conclusion. Tonight's meeting is being streamed live on the City of Kalamazoo's Facebook page and the city's YouTube channel. Individuals without a computer or internet may listen to the meeting by calling area code 269-552-6425 and entering meeting ID number 945-1202-0822 when prompted. The City Commission will take up the order of business where it left off with the consideration of regular agenda items tonight. And please note that the public comment period portion of this meeting was concluded during last night's meeting prior to the recess. And with that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Kalamazoo's Mayor David Anderson.
Thank you very much, Deputy City Manager Jeff Chamberlain. I appreciate that. I would like to call to order the recessed meeting of the Kalamazoo City Commission that began on Monday, August 17th, 2020. Clerk Borling, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Cunningham.
Here.
Commissioner Hess.
Present.
Commissioner Knott.
Here.
Commissioner Pradle.
Present.
Commissioner Urban. Vice Mayor Griffin.
Here.
Mayor Anderson.
Here. So is there a motion to excuse Commissioner Urban?
So moved.
Motion made by Commissioner Hess,
Support.
supported by Commissioner Cunningham. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. All right, motion passes. The absent commissioner is excused. Since we recessed our meeting, we are starting in the middle of our agenda. So the next item on our agenda is H, the regular agenda. And we have two items on the regular agenda. City Manager Ritzma.
Item H1 is adoption of a resolution affirming the adoption of the Parkview Hills Neighborhood Plan 2020 as a sub-plan to the City of Kalamazoo's comprehensive plan. And I'd like to welcome Katie Riley, our neighborhood activator, and she's just going to provide some remarks about this for you to understand more.
Thank you, Manager Ritzma.
Good evening. I'm Katie Riley, Neighborhood Activator for the City of Kalamazoo. So first, for the Parkview Hills Neighborhood Plan, I wanted to highlight a bit about their process. This process started with the kind of recreation of the neighborhood association. There was one a long time ago. It kind of went away, and so through this process, we supported the creation of the Neighborhood Association of Parkview Hills. Their planning process included a whole slew of techniques, including focus groups, popping up at existing neighborhood events, community meetings, and one-on-one discussions. It's also worth noting that Parkview Hills is not like our other neighborhoods in that it is a planned unit development. So there are, it was an interesting process to negotiate with residents and the property management and the existing community board that's makes some of the decisions for the property, as well as how the new neighborhood association kind of fit into their goals. Their neighborhood plan focuses on the connected city, inviting public places, environmental responsibility, safe community, youth development, complete neighborhood, and good governance, strategic vision goals. And then finally, I asked one of the members of the planning committee if there was anything that they wanted me to highlight this evening. And he mentioned a few things. First, related to their traffic calming goals through the planning process and communication with public services. They were able to get some of the new traffic speed radar signs. The bases are in, and so those signs should be installed soon. And they also wanted to highlight environmental responsibility as it relates to, it's very important to their neighborhood, having a lot of existing natural features that they're designed around, and that ties back to their founding principles back in the early 70s. And the final thing was that the new creation of the neighborhood association has been a great asset for them. However, similar to what we're all experiencing, they're having some challenges with COVID-19, but they feel that their plan is a template to help them further dialogue with the city and partners moving forward.
Thank you, Kathleen Riley. Are there any questions for staff at this time from commissioners? All right, seeing no questions.
David?
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh,
Really quickly.
yes.
I noticed in the plan, Katie, that the deer calming was an issue. How did they propose taking care of that, and what was the discussion around that, please?
Yeah, so related to deer, a lot of the conversation is a combination of both how the deer population is somewhat of a regional problem in that, deer don't know city boundaries and they're not kind of restricted by that. So we are going to need to partner with a lot of different types of organizations to really get a handle on that, but then also specific neighborhood level goals in terms of looking at education about how we're feeding deer and participating in projects similar to one that's currently going on by K college students to kind of understand where deer are in the city and how they're traveling. And so kind of getting that data, doing some education, and then understanding that it's a larger scale issue.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed you, Commissioner Hess. Any other questions for staff? All right, so the recommended action is a motion to adopt the resolution. Is there a motion? Motion made by Commissioner Hess, supported by Commissioner Knott. Any discussion? Okay, Clerk Borling, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson.
Yes. Thank you, Clerk Borling. Thank you, Commissioners. The motion passes. Item H2, City Manager.
First reading of an ordinance amending Chapter 18, non-discrimination, and Chapter 18A, fair housing.
Is there a staff presentation?
Yes, our Community Economic or Planning Economic Development Director, Rebecca Kick, and our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Director, Dorla Bonner, both have a presentation for you.
Director Kick?
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Commissioners. Tonight, Director Bonner and I do have a short presentation. I'm going to share my screen with you. So as tonight is the first reading, we didn't want to go through a lot of details. We know that folks have been really following us closely, and we're excited to be at this point in our milestones. So I just quickly, if no one has ever heard of Chapter 18 and Chapter 18A, we just wanted to do a quick cap. One, it creates a civil rights board for hearing local discrimination complaints. This furthers protected classes like educational affiliation, status as a victim of domestic violence, criminal backgrounds, as well as source of income. This ordinance also helps to protect against predatory application fees. So how did we get here? How did we get that information? So in February of this year, the commission held a work session where Vice Mayor Griffin, Dr. Charlie Davis from Isaac, and Director Shalana Lewis from the Truth and Racial Healing and Transformation Group out of the Kalamazoo Community Foundation, did a presentation and transferred the Fair Housing Ordinance to city staff. Then Director Bonner and I started to schedule meetings to introduce the ordinance to the public. But that's when also a lot of COVID, the executive orders were introduced, and we weren't able to fulfill all of our public participation in person the way that we would have hoped. So we held a commission presentation on July the 20th, where we looked at a new draft ordinance, and this is where we separated out into Chapter 18 and Chapter 18A. And then on August 4th, the 6th, on the 10th, we held a town hall on Facebook. And on the 13th, we held forums to discuss the changes and questions in the ordinance with several housing providers, landlords, and others, other partner organizations that can help make this a very successful implemented ordinance. And last night was the first reading of the draft ordinance and presenting this back to the city commissioners for your final consideration on September the 8th. So because of the feedback from July 20th all the way until last night, we have recommended the following changes to the ordinance. One is the Civil Rights Board to make recommendations to the city manager to hear the appeals of the cases. And have Director Bonner talk about that, how that goes through her office of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Change from the language that we were using around victim of domestic violence to survivor of domestic violence. We are also including an 18-month review of the ordinance so that we can talk about anything that we would like to strengthen or change as we begin to consider cases. And then lastly, we've added the effective date of November the 30th. Attorney Robinson can go into this in more detail, but generally when an ordinance is passed, if you voted to adopt the ordinance on September the 8th, it would become effective 10 days later. Because this ordinance requires us to have a civil rights board, which then investigates and hears the complaints, it's extremely important that we get that civil rights board in place. And I will go over a timeline which shows how, when we will take applications, how long we need to review those applications, when the first meeting of the Civil Rights Board would be. And as the effective date is November 30th, but you have 90 days to make a complaint, we could still hear complaints all the way back to September of this year, even though the effective date is November the 30th. So Director Bonner, I'll have you walk us through the Civil Rights Board complaint process.
Thank you, Director Kick. I want to give a little history. I think based on the comments last night, people are reading different versions of this document, and it has taken many, many versions. So an earlier version had the Civil Rights Board in a purely advisory function. But when we rolled this out in our first town hall meeting, we shared the enhanced version of the Civil Rights Board. So this is the way this works. When a person has a complaint, they file a complaint with us and through our office, and then we, along with the attorney, city attorney, will review the complaint, mostly the city attorney because he's the legal expert, to find out if it is a local, state, or federal protected class. We are not going to hear complaints around state and federal protected classes. We are going to use our partners at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights and the Fair Housing Center. So that's the first touch, is determining where that complaint should lie to get the best treatment. And so from there, if it is a local protected class, that means a protected class that we've created that is not handled by state or covered under state or federal law, then our office, the city will handle that. An appropriate department will be assigned to do the investigation. And this is where the board comes in. The board will get the results of those investigations, and they will make a recommendation to our office, to the city manager for consideration. If there is an appeal, if that person that filed the complaint is not satisfied, they have the right to file an appeal that will also go back to the board. Or that case can just go to the city manager or is designated for conciliation. And so the concern was, does this board have authority? It has the authority to review the investigation and determine and to make a formal recommendation for next steps. Thank you, Director Kick. I think that's my whole part.
Yeah, thank you, Director Bonner. Another outcome of the feedback that we heard also includes we understand that when ordinances change, that we certainly need to be sure that everyone is informed and trained on that new ordinance. So we are working together with our community investment team to prepare training for fair housing law with the Fair Housing Center, which is located here in the city of Kalamazoo. This training will be offered to both property owners and tenants, and we hope to begin that training as soon as November, because this training will also be really critical for the board as well, to have an underlying foundation and understanding of fair housing law. Again, I mentioned the 18-month review of Chapter 18A as well. We have also considered doing a rental registration future study to be able to look at the entire landscape of all of our rentals in the city of Kalamazoo, how our chapters, other ordinances also are working with rental registration. We are also working with the W.E. Upjohn Institute regarding a landlord and tenant support pilot program, which is under development. Last year, Vice Mayor Griffin provided city staff with a recommendation for a landlord-resident connection pilot based on some other existing programs operating in other cities. And so city staff shared this information with the United Way, Continuum of Care, and the Upjohn Institute staff. The Upjohn researchers consulted with the city and several other housing partners to begin developing a proposal for both security deposit assistance as well as added insurance program that could assist people overcome some barriers of screening requirements and high moving costs as well. This pilot is under development, and we do look forward to sharing more details in the next few months. So lastly, I want to cover with you the timeline. So the next reading on September 8th is our public hearing where you will actually take your vote to adopt this ordinance. What would happen next? I apologize, this date is incorrect. That should be November the 30th. The board recruitment would actually begin in September, October. We're going to give about 4 weeks for applications and their review, take in applications for about 2 weeks, and then allow 2 weeks for the application review. The City Commission would then approve those board members to go forward at the first meeting in November. And then the first Civil Rights Board meeting would occur in December, and they would begin their fair housing law training, and they would begin writing bylaws and procedural outlines. And then lastly, we would begin the property owner training as well for landlords and tenants at the Fair Housing Center. And they are currently holding virtual trainings. They've done about 30 already, so they're extremely prepared to offer these virtual trainings moving forward. So at this time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And if you have any questions for Director Bonner, myself, or Attorney Robinson, we'd be happy to discuss.
Director Kick, how many people are actually going to be on the Civil Rights Board?
I believe our number is 7 with 2 staff. So it's a 9-member board total.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mayor, I believe you're muted.
No wonder no one's responding to me. Teresa and I went through this on a call earlier today. Decided to mute each other. Doesn't work very well. All right. So any other questions for staff? Yeah, Commissioner Pradle.
Yeah, this could be directed towards Director Bonner or Director Kick. But I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about once the application process is out there, how you envisioning that announcement going and publicizing and whatnot for applications, and then if you could just share a little bit about the review process.
Ooh. Well, I'm gonna do the first one because that one I have a good answer for. Hopefully, I've sent our city clerk some information to I've never started a board before, so I'm learning. I would like to be able to announce at the public hearing, the next meeting, that the application process is open. If you say yes, then we just start, because it's a very tight timeline. We will, in the past, my past experience with seating a board is that you have a committee that reviews the applications based on the criteria. And the criteria is very simple. They have to be local. They need to have some experience in fair housing law in this area. And so, to be fair, for me, I always have to have a scoring system, so we do it the same way all the time. So that is another thing I'm working on. How do we score applications to make sure it's equitable? And from there, Attorney Robinson, let me know if I'm missing anything that I need to consider. I guess that means I did good. Thank you very much.
Other questions for staff, commissioners?
I do.
Commissioner Urban, yes.
Yes. Then once the applications have been screened by this committee, well, before I go any further, describe the makeup of the committee. Has that been determined yet? The review committee?
We don't have anything specific other than the requirements. When you say makeup, are you talking about, are we looking for specific demographics?
Well, the committee that's going to review the applications for whatever criteria we have.
Oh, the reviewing committee.
Yes.
That would be all of you. I believe this board is appointed by the mayor. So I would defer to the attorney if you create a subcommittee within yourselves to review the applications.
Okay, so we do it, or we delegate it to a committee of us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would say it's because the mayor's making the appointment and the commission is voting on those. The mayor has a choice of how he wishes to go about that.
Mm-hmm.
If he wants to create a subcommittee of commissioners to vet people, that's fine. He could do it all on his own, or he could delegate it to staff. So there is no set way of doing it. It's however the mayor chooses to go about it.
Okay, well, that's probably something we'll need to discuss at some point, but not tonight.
Yeah, and I would just like to add that I'm sure we're going to get more applications than we have spots. So I would like to have the information sooner than later, so we'll know what we need to do in our office to help you do what you need to do.
Absolutely.
Director Bonner, remind me again what day the applications are due?
We're going to have a 4-week window from we don't have a specific date. We say September, October. So my goal is to be able to say, after you all vote the next meeting, that the application is officially open, and then set that 4 weeks.
Great. That's helpful. Other questions?
That would be approximately October 6th.
Thank you, Commissioner Hess. All right, seeing no other questions for staff, is there a motion to offer the ordinance for first reading at this point then? I see a motion made by Commissioner Knott.
All right. Before you go too far, these are two separate ordinances, and I
Okay.
didn't want to jump in, but they are tie barred. So they both need to pass in order for either one to become effective, but they are two separate ordinances. So the motion should be to ask for the introduction of the amendments to Chapter 18. Then once that you deal with that, then the second motion would be to introduce the adoption of Chapter 18A.
Okay, that's helpful, Attorney Robinson. Wasn't separated here on the agenda, so I didn't recognize that, but that's clarifying. I appreciate it. So the first ordinance that we are dealing with here in our motions is the non-discrimination, the Chapter 18. So seeing that we have no more discussion then, is there a motion to offer the Chapter 18 ordinance for first reading?
So moved.
Motion made by Commissioner Knott, and before it was supported by Commissioner Urban last time we did this. Any discussion on this, commissioners? All right, Clerk
I
Barley.
don't have any discussion.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
just,
Yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, I don't have anything for discussion. I just wanted to thank city staff for everything that has gone into and the listening to the community and making the changes even all the way up to the last point. I just wanted to acknowledge that in this space, and I will later, but
Thank you, Vice
that's
Mayor
all.
Griffin. All right, Clerk Barley.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson,
Yes,
Commissioner Cunningham.
Yes.
thank you, Clerk Barley. So I am now going to look for a motion on Chapter 18A, which is the Fair Housing Ordinance. So the recommended action is to offer the ordinance for first reading.
I so move.
Okay,
Jack said it.
competition there. All right. Motion made by Commissioner Urban, supported by Commissioner Hess. Is there discussion on this? So I know we'll have an opportunity then for a little more discussion, but I guess one thing I would like to do at this moment here is recognize that an individual who is in the community, who has a great interest in the community and is looking for how the community can be improved, and spends time working on that, and spends a lot of time focusing on policy, understanding that policies being in place and policy change is ultimately what helps processes move forward. Well, such a person in that community is our Vice Mayor, Patrice Griffin, who started working on this before she was elected and has spent a great deal of time. And as long and drawn out as all of this has been, and, as, challenging as it's been, and even at this moment, probably being approached and considered by many people in the community with a great deal of cautiousness and concern even perhaps, but it demonstrates kind of how a process can happen for someone who's willing to be persistent and put in some effort and trying to be thoughtful about that. So I want to recognize the Vice Mayor for that. Appreciate that very much. At this point then, there was no more discussion. I'm going to ask Clerk Borley to call the roll on this.
Commissioner Knott,
Yes.
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Vice Mayor, Mayor Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
and Commissioner Hess.
Yes.
Thank you, commissioners. That motion passes. not sure if I said that for the last time, but let's say I did. All right, so now we are at the point in the agenda, which is the opportunity for commissioner comments. And I wonder at this point, I don't think that we're going to have any extended additional discussion here as I understand it, but are there particular things that commissioners would like to say relative to the fact that we are, in our extended meeting that we recessed earlier this morning? Any commissioner comments? All right. Commissioner Cunningham, yes.
Right. Monumental night. It's unfortunate to be overshadowed by what we dealt with over the weekend. The project that our vice mayor brought forth is something that we hope to be a cornerstone to fix some of the structural, systematic issues we've dealt with in our community to improve our community. So I just want to give a special thank you, Vice Mayor, for that line of work, and to city staff. COVID threw a lot of headaches our way, I'll just say it like that, and you still endured and figured out a way to get this this particular agenda done. So I look forward to moving this opportunity forward. I look forward to working with my colleagues and working with the community at large to ensure that this system that we're trying to put into place is executed in the best way possible, with the understanding that hopefully we find ways to enhance it, make it stronger, so that it creates an even better impact. And I think a piece of it is another highlight that with our housing shortage here and affordable housing shortage that we have here in Kalamazoo, we have to utilize every single tool. We have to be creative, and we have to be brave and bold to execute in those places and spaces. So this is just one step in the journey, and it's kind of frustrating. For the frustrating piece of this was the longevity and how long it had to take to actually get to this point. But we see that even up until last night, there were details that need to be ironed out. So sometimes some of these issues take longer than we would like or appreciate. As it pertains to over the weekend, I have a lot of pent up energy that is going towards a fairly similar route that this actual ordinance that this chapter 18 just took, where we have to create the systematic pieces in place that ensures we no longer deal with this. Not just we, but our children and our children's children. As I acknowledged on last night, it's unfortunate that institutional knowledge was lost along the way that we could have utilized in order to have a better outcome for over the weekend. So we have to ensure that institutional knowledge is in place. We have to ensure that there's accountability. We have to ensure that, right, wrong, or indifferent, there's consistency. And that is something that we have been consistent. We've been consistently letting down the community. So we have to figure out, a way forward together, both staff, but once again, at the top of the mountain is those elected officials. And it is our opportunity to really dig deep, take the time that needs to be taken to make sure that we're passing policies to change systems in this community. I can't speak for every other community around us. I love to work regionally. And I know that not only will I be applying pressure on our electeds here to create those changes, but I'll be also applying pressure on our electeds, surrounding electeds, so that they understand that we're a reflection of them and they're a reflection of us. And if we're making these strong changes of systematic changes, then they should be too. And so I look forward to the journey. To the community at large, I'm frustrated with you. To city staff, to all of my colleagues here, I'm frustrated with you. But that frustration to me is an acknowledgement that there are some issues that we need to fix. So let's just be honest, let's be clear, and let's try and work on them.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Cunningham. I appreciate that. Other comments from commissioners? Okay, so I'm taking it back here. I'm assuming, I'm not seeing anybody jump in right away, so I'm assuming, oh, Commissioner Urban?
Yeah, I thought I'd speak now. Frankly, I was really pretty overwhelmed by the volume and the consistency of the testimony we heard last night. And it is causing me to consider that some dramatic actions will need to be taken soon, along with longer term actions that will take months and years. But this is a political problem, not a police procedures problem primarily. We don't solve police procedures problems, we solve political problems. That's what we do. The city manager is a manager, he's not a politician. The city police chief is a police chief. She's not a politician. We are the people that receive the word of our citizens on all sides of this question and this national problem locally manifested. And we are the ones that are expected to lead on it. I want us to step up on it promptly. And that's about as dramatic as I can be now and about as concise as I can be now.
Appreciate that, Commissioner Urban. Anyone else this evening? So I'm not seeing anybody jump in, so I guess just a few things that I want to talk about this, and I guess I'm warning you, I may be a little bit long-winded. Going to try to be informative. I hope it's helpful. It's sometimes just helpful for me to remind myself as where we are, how we got here, how this works, some of that sort of stuff. So bear with me, and hopefully I won't, this will be useful time. So been thinking about some of the big things and having some conversations during the day-to-day, actually a lengthy conversation with Vice Mayor Griffin today, and thinking about this idea of accountability and also how this ties back to some of the comments last night and the general community that doesn't necessarily tune in or pay a whole lot of attention. And I also reflect back to the time that I have had on the city commission, which has been some extended periods of time here. And I've certainly experienced some much less intense times and more intense times. And I would suggest that for a whole variety of reasons, we are in more intense times now, unprecedented times in certain ways, and times that will demand for us to work together and think together in different ways. And kind of just setting the stage for all this is that, you know, although I understand and I certainly take responsibility for the fact that you know, all of us as commissioners or me serving in the mayor spot, you know, have to take responsibility for how our organization runs. I kind of want to talk a little bit about how that works. So in our form of government, there is a group that has ultimate responsibility, and that's this commission. And each one of us on this commission has one vote. There are 7 votes altogether, 4 votes can make a decision. And so in this form of government, we basically hire somebody, in particular, our manager here is here with us tonight, to run the operations. And for some years, this is how it has worked. You know, it is not a situation where we can all sit down in a room with Jim and say, you know, on our own, this is what we're going to do. You know, we do our work in public. By law, that's all required. And this is what it's looked like over many years in the past, is that we create in a public fashion a set of goals. We ask the manager to come up with a plan for how to execute on those goals. That manager provides to us a budget to support his actions to execute on those goals. And then we get reports from the manager on how that work is happening. And that is how, in a public way, a manager works with 7 bosses, and that relationship occurs as far as the city work getting done. So that's the model. And where are we at today on all that? I think there's a few things that have occurred that, as you can imagine, some of this work is relationship work. You know, commissioners have conversations. We bring together and look at each other and trust each other and read each other and get a sense of why we were elected to be here and what we care about. And all of us recognize that none of us are paid to be full-time city employees. We all have other things that we do in our lives, and we come together for this work of the city that we all care about. And none of us would really spend the time running for this job, you know, if we didn't care about the city. And that doesn't necessarily mean that in any given circumstance, we are going to all agree on a specific attribute of what the best thing is to do for the city or for the city to do in any given moment. But it's a relationship-based kind of undertaking. It's a teamwork approach. And as I reflected on that today, and we talked about that, we realized that, you know, we are a new team. We have a new mayor, we have a new vice mayor, we have new commissioners, and often that team building occurs in the time that we spend together when we're discussing things in person or in a smaller group and how things emerge. And all that ended months and months ago in mid-March. And we were really not able to do that kind of interpersonal team building. We had a retreat scheduled, which we had to cancel. So we've been hurt by that, by the lack of opportunity to spend that important time together and build our relationships and talk about those important things. And then it has obviously become more evident very recently here that there are expectations about accountability, and I think that's the strongest word, and that community is looking to the commission and saying, how are you, commission, accountable in terms of the expectations we have for city staff, how we can enforce those expectations, what are the things that we want to have done in the community. And so sometimes we're trapped, any one of us, in a situation where we've been elected, we're in this job, and a community member says to us, I want you to do this, I want this to happen. In some ways, our individual response can seem a little weak. You know, I'm one of 7. Well, I can recommend this, or we have it in a plan, but we are not in real time, each one of us, individual managers in the moment of what happens for any department in the city, you know, for that kind of work.
We can't do.
So what is it, you know, that we need to do now so that we can improve our accountability in real time and provide that kind of you know, example of the work that needs to be done, reflect what our desires are, so that, as Commissioner Cunningham noted, we can make sure that that accountability is in place. It's not fleeting accountability. It's not one-time relationship-based accountability. How are we going to do that work? And I think all of us have been hearing that loud and clear. And maybe some of that frustration, Commissioner Cunningham, comes from how can I manifest that accountability? You know, how can I really fulfill what I really do want to do in my heart here, which is create a situation where we have a huge institution in Kalamazoo that employs 650 people and has a budget in excess of $200 million, funded by individuals that we spend time together to create livable, humane places for all of us to reside. Whether it's public safety, whether it's wastewater treatment, whether it's our parks, whatever it is, we're doing this together for each other. So along those lines, I'm just thinking about how we're going to move this forward. And I think one thing that is so important is that the only way that we get any work done is we have staff people that do that work every day, who are hired to do that work. And part of our responsibility is seriously supporting and recognizing our staff that do that work. Whether it's our manager, Jim Ritzma, who I happen to think is a very, very good city manager. And to the staff that report to Jim Ritzma, Chief Carrie Ann Thomas, who I think is an exemplary chief, and our first female chief, as a matter of fact, in the city of Kalamazoo. And further on down to people who do the work of housing inspections and clearing out the hydrants and cleaning the streets and policing. And we need to be in a situation where we can be supportive of this team that is attempting to do that work, and we need to be able to communicate that. How can we clearly communicate our expectations? We don't want to be our communication to always just be, you messed up, you messed up, you messed up, you messed up. How do we do this work together where, because we help our city manager be successful by our input and support and encouragement, that we are all successful as a commission and as a community? And then how do we incorporate the opportunity to expect accountability during the times between evaluations and between budget seasons and between, commission meetings and between extended time periods where we ask for reports or we ask for investigations and we go through an RFP process to identify someone to do those investigations. And in the meantime, I think there's that feeling that, is this taking too long? Are there some things that we can wait for that are more extended, and some things we need to talk about more quickly? And how can we have a working relationship where we can have that kind of almost immediate accountability? And we are also in a time now, and I guess I'm going to seem a little bit like an old guy, although I am saying this, is that when I started doing this work, everything wasn't on social media here at the city. And that was only back in 2005. At that time, we actually had a very strong Kalamazoo Gazette that everybody looked to every day for the news about what was happening, that actually endorsed candidates and was very involved. And now the way that we get and share news is so different. Our news cycle now begins the moment something occurs in real time. If you looked at some of the pictures of the very unfortunate gathering that happened when these outside agitators came to town this last weekend, every one of the pictures, everyone's hand is up like this in the air, running their real time live streaming Facebook camera or videoing at the same time. So news now occurs for us in the world this way, real time when it's happening. And there's upsides to that, and there's downsides to that, because every little news source now is going to be its own little slice of the big picture that's happening, but has also made clear to us that we need to up our game here at the city in terms of communication. We shouldn't be waiting around even till the next day. How can we get things out more in real time and do that work that needs to be done? So I can say that from my perspective, and I feel that everyone's on the same page with this, is that despite the fact that we still can't get together necessarily, and I guess we can on each other's back porch sitting a few feet away, we need to be able to look in each other's eyes, trust each other, share our hearts, what we care about, support our team, or change things if that becomes necessary. But changing things shouldn't be the go-to. Support and working together has got to be where we start, because we need to have a good, capable, ethical, competent team of people working the city of Kalamazoo to execute the good work that we all desire for this community, for everybody in this community. So that said, I am going to intentionally try to move this idea of us engaging in a way that is more intensive and helpful for Jim and his team in real time. And in addition, looks for whatever other things we're putting in place and processes that we can really have a opportunity for a communication loop that can occur more quickly and help get to the community better, real information in real time as things go on. And I think that there's urgency about that, and I appreciate that urgency. And I'm trusting very much that that is what we all want. And I'm going to say, including our city manager, and that we do this work together to make Kalamazoo be the place that we want it to be. So thank you for bearing with me for all this. I appreciate that very much. Commissioner Hess?
Are you finished with your comments, David?
What?
Are you finished with your comments?
Yeah.
So you touched on a few things, and I had prepared a few comments, but didn't know if they were appropriate, but it does follow up well with what you said. Today is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. So as a female who, since Title IX was passed, has been fighting for the rights for women to play, and for equal rights in sport, I honor the fact that these women worked so hard and have tried to getting women the right to vote. So I would just ask us all to use that this year. And so therefore I look to two women tonight. The first is Carrie Ann Thomas, the first female chief, as you said, the first female chief. And I think the biggest fear of the first female anything, or the first African-American, or the first Asian-American, or the youngest, is being the last. And so I think the pressure is so great on those who are the first. And I appreciate Carrie Ann's service. I appreciate her witness, the fact that she's served this community for 28 years, and with pride and with honor and integrity. So I want to thank her for that. I also want to thank Michelle Obama. And most of us, I believe, were here at the meeting last night when she was speaking. I don't know if any of us saw or read what she said, but one thing that resonates with your thoughts, David, is where she said, "Going high means standing fierce against hatred while remembering that we are one nation under God. And if we want to survive, we've got to find a way to live together and work together across our differences." That's just a great truth. It's just a great truth, not only here in Kalamazoo, but throughout this country. And I've said since I joined this commission, since I was elected to the commission, that I really believe that we can work together. And so my second thought was this coaching. I go to coaching, and David, you talked about us being a team. At the end of every one of our practices, we would go around in the circle and what happened today and what was good today about practice and all of this. There would be some times when we go around and talk about each person in the circle, like one person, let's talk about them. Tell them something good. So I just want to do that for you. I look to our team, and I'm proud to be a member of this team. Jack, I appreciate your experience and your wisdom, which yes means your age, and the fact that you're retired and able to put intentional thought and purpose into what it is you do. Thank you. Eric, I love your passion. I love that you are engaged in this community and that you care so much about our youth, and that you're a voice for everything that you care about, a strong voice for everything you care about. Aaron, I love that you began as a leader in Vine, and that you're now a leader, a state leader of Equity Michigan, Equality Michigan. And I really appreciate your strong voice and your willingness to step outside your comfort zone. Chris, we met as candidates. I didn't know you before. And you inspire me to treat each vote with my family in mind. And for you, you have your kids in mind, but for me, I have my grandkids in mind. It's my grandkids. You know, I'm going to vote so that they have a Kalamazoo that they can grow up in, loving and being good citizens. I love your preparation and the care that you take in this community. Patrice, we also ran together, even though you were already there. So like you were the old person that knew everything about commission. I love your persistence, the fact that you chose to bring this ordinance to fruition and to take a chance on it and to stick with it. That's what we do. That's what women do. We stick with it. And I talked to a wise woman this morning. This whole process we're going through is rather like giving birth. You know, it's like birthing something great, and I'm waiting for it. So I love your persistence. I love your strong voice of justice, Patrice. Thank you. And David, while your leadership style might be different than Bobby's, your record of service and sacrifice in Kalamazoo is exemplary, and you inspire me. The fact that you lead with kindness is important, especially at a time like this. So that said, I believe in our team. And like you said, I would love to get in the gym with you all. I want to get there. I want to play volleyball with you all. But I believe that we can do the work for the greater good of this community together. And while I've mentioned just the commissioners, Manager Ritzema, thank you for your leadership and for being the athletic director, and Clyde for being our compliance coordinator. And so everything is not sport. I get that, but we have a mindset of sport. And I think everyone can kind of understand where we're coming from with this voice of sport, of competition, because competition can easily be us versus them. And if it's us versus them, the only way you win is to eliminate another. And so I'm asking for us to say competition is working with the other, not against the other. So I'm asking for us to work together towards something much greater than ourselves. I'm done.
Thank you, Commissioner Hess. Anyone else this evening? So I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Look forward to, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Griffin, I didn't see you.
That's okay. I was trying to throw my hands up. So I have a few things to say. I'm going to start, I'll start with the housing ordinance. Again, well, to the community, we still have to get through September 8th, but just having an understanding that this is not encompass, every single issue that we have in this community or every single issue that needs to be addressed. as it relates to housing. This is just one component, a very important component that deals with discrimination or anti-discrimination. That is the systems change, the beginning of the systems change that we need in order to make sure that our community becomes equitable in terms of housing. So again, I want to thank everyone on city staff who had a part to do with this. And I'll get more extensive after the 8th because I'm having positive thinking with this. But to even get to this point, it took a lot. When you start talking about anti-discrimination, you start hearing what's on people's hearts and what's on people's minds. I've been listening to it all of my life anyways, but specifically for the past 3 years, specifically here in the city of Kalamazoo. Some of those things have had an opportunity to be shared with the larger community via comments that have been made. And I just really want to acknowledge the work it took to get to this point. So again, thank you to everybody, Dr. Charlay, Isaac, and TRHT, Shalana Lewis, and everyone else involved with that, just to get it to this point. Regardless of what happens the next time we meet. This was a feat, a huge feat, that was not easy. So thank you. And those are my thoughts on that. And so my thoughts on what happened this weekend, just to tie that up. So I want to kind of address some of the things that came up in comments, and to be clear and direct with that, because that's just how I like to be. There were a lot of very specific comments, a very specific ask from the community, and there aren't 4 votes to remove City Manager Rissima from this seat. So I just want to say that very clearly. So address what has been said and acknowledge that clearly. Now, with that being said, moving forward, and I know that Commissioner Cunningham and Mayor Anderson kind of touched on that, and so did Commissioner Urban. This, and I'm new to this commission. This commission has not necessarily always used the powers that they've had to address some of the things that have needed to be done. And so specifically as it relates to accountability, there's 2 things that need to be addressed. One, what's happening or what's going to happen with what happened this weekend. And then what are we going to do moving forward to make sure that doesn't happen? And so those 2 things haven't been clearly discussed. They haven't been clearly addressed. While we have had chance to talk amongst ourselves, I don't know it, so I can't imagine the rest of the community feeling comfortable with how we move forward. And so it would be wrong to not acknowledge the way community feels about things. And so just to second what Commissioner Urban said, we need an immediate, and then we need a long-term, because this is about system change here, right? It's not about always the people in the positions, although that does play a part. We're dealing in systems that were meant to do exactly what we're doing. And so there has not been a measure of accountability to the city manager or for the city manager for things that happen. And so that's something that we need to create sooner than later, so that when things happen, we can hold city manager accountable and there can be clear steps for what that looks like. And so it's unfortunate that things keep happening and we keep having these circular conversations. And I can understand the frustration of the community wanting to know, when are we going to get to the point? When are we going to get to, did you hear what I said? Because it doesn't sound like it. And we need to, this is on us to do. We need to get down to that yesterday. We needed to do that yesterday, right? Because community, and I'm talking in the context of KDPS right now, because I'm speaking about the events that happened with that. They're still raw from what happened in June. And then you have a whole entire community that's raw from a lifetime of experiences. So what do we do with that? It's one thing to apologize and to speak to doing something differently. But if I don't have anything that makes me feel like it's going to happen, then those are just a bunch of words. And what I don't want to do, personally speaking for myself, is be in this seat and there's nothing that gets changed. I don't want to talk for a bunch of hours about things that people have already lifted up. What are our actionable steps? So before we leave this meeting tonight, I would like for us to have some sort of, this is the date that we're going to have this done by to deal with this. And this is the date that we're going to have this dealt with to deal with this. I'm not saying that we need to have all of the answers, right? It's not about that, but something that shows a step in a direction of progress. And in this case, it would be accountability. And I'll just stop with that right now.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken already? Who wants to say anything? So I don't see that. Commissioner Urban then?
Jack, you're muted.
Yep, there we go. There we go. Well, I just wanted to pick up on what Commissioner Griffin was saying about setting dates. My experience from working with Isaac and organizing public meetings to deal with integration of our transportation systems in the county. What I learned from her, the people in Isaac, was you set a date even before you have your plans made. And then on that date, things have to happen. And that's a tremendous incentive to have something in place. Maybe not everything, but it stops this interminable analyzing and talking. So painful as it may sound and as scary as it may sound, going right up to the edge of a cliff without knowing what's on the other side. I have learned to trust that practice of setting a date and say, by this date, we're going to have this such and such prepared to present to the community. I think that's about as far as we ought to go, because we want to keep the options as wide as possible, because we haven't heard all of the ideas all of us have and all of the energy that each of us can bring to our own take on these matters. So we have to be careful not to be too quick to be specific, but I'm all for setting dates. And I think a first date I would like to suggest is a date for having a work session to follow up on how we begin to form stronger relationships among each other and do all the work that has to go on dealing with long-term policy, some way for us to regularly meet to handle the longer-term issues that take strong relationships to push through. I have given some of you an idea of how to do this, and I need to meet with all of you soon. But clearly, we need to all be in the room, hear the same question, and all hear the answers at the same time. That's fundamental.
Thank you, Commissioner Urban. I believe we do have a retreat scheduled for September 12th. Is that correct? Right. Yes, Commissioner Pradel.
Vice Mayor Griffin, I really appreciate you lifting that up. You know, I'll just be the first to admit I shared this a little bit last night, and I'm trying to be brief today because I feel like I spent enough talking last night. But you know, I heard very clearly, you know, Commissioner Cunningham, you know, you set out basically four tenets that you saw that after talking with so many people in the community, doing outreach, with talking to each of us and make with such great intentionality, talking with each of us, you laid out accountability, you laid out data, you laid out communication, you laid out community. Did I miss any of those four or goof any of those four up?
Upholding standards, changing standards.
It seems to me, that one of the frustrations that I've encountered is, again, the newbie, and I apologize that, this just shows my youth on this commission, but sometimes that youth and inexperience is a great lens to really see how things really are, because you haven't been entrenched or involved in it for very long, and so you can look at it with a clean lens. And I think that's one great thing about the new leadership we have on the commission. We have three fresh, brand new people who are serving. We have Vice Mayor Griffin, we have Commissioner Hess, and I'm here. And the neat and special thing is we each are bringing unique perspectives, and in many ways we're bringing a lot of strengths that we share in terms of being parents and our love for this community. And but I guess where I'm going with this is that one of the things that I've observed is just that we have, it seems like it comes to a point sometimes where we have these very heavy issues, and to your point, Vice Mayor Griffin, we don't have the opportunity to really talk about them, to share what's on our mind, to circle around those issues to get them accomplished. And so, I guess one of my recommendations would be as well is, it's so hard when you bring in all these proposals into one meeting where it's already difficult to have these conversations. If there may be a way for us to say, okay, after the housing equity ordinance vote on the 8th, we had devote and carve out an agenda piece to each one of those points that Commissioner Cunningham laid out. So each meeting has a focus, and whether that be, saying, okay, tonight we're talking about accountability. How do you think we're performing when it comes to accountability? And not only provide ourselves an opportunity to kind of share our lens and how we feel that things with accountability are going, but also through public comment, allow the community an opportunity to share how they feel that specific topic is going. And, maybe the next week is, standards. The next week is communication. The next week is how to get community engagement. Because there's a lot of that to digest. And, that was just a thought of maybe how we could proceed with that as well, and actually set some dates to this, but also holding ourselves accountable to making sure that we don't walk away until we have some things that we all kind of feel that we're can wrap our hands around and agree upon, that are things that we want to tackle, or we want to make sure they're changed or improved upon.
So I just want to circle back around, Vice Mayor, on this. Do you have a particular idea of something you would like to see that happens tonight, then, that you feel that we should act on in some way tonight, or what are you thinking about as far as that goes?
As far as tonight, I guess I'm thinking two things. One, what is the plan forward to address what happened this weekend? And then that's that. And then what is the plan moving forward to create accountability measures for City Manager Ritzema, so that this body can hold him accountable to, with respects to, the things that go on in the city. That's one of those things that you just mentioned earlier that has not happened yet. So it's unclear. So when things happen, where do we tie that accountability in to the city manager, and have a clear-cut understanding on what our expectations are, and how we would like to see things happen. I don't believe that we're trying to do the job of the city manager, but as representatives of this community, we need to have that in place, so that every time something happens, because things do happen, we're not having to hurry up and quickly trying to react and respond, and hurry up and get together to figure out what's going to happen with this incident, and hurry up and figure out what's going to happen with this. And then this commission will flip in 2 years, and then something else happens, and it's all in disarray. And then what ends up happening is you have a community that's feeling dejected, not listened to, unheard. And then we see what happens, right? So to answer the question again, what is going to be in place to address what happened this weekend? And for me, it's the planning for that event, and the arrest of individuals, and we can get into all the individuals that were arrested, but specifically media and legal observers, right? So what are we going to do about those things? Because clearly the community has concern. Commission has, addressed what our concerns are. There has been an apology from the chief. And those things are all good, but that's not it, right? That's not any sort of comfort. And that also doesn't mean that won't happen again, or that we realize that there is issue with, the way some of the things are handled. And so, yeah, I'll just add this comment because it's not about saying a person is not a good person. This isn't personal, right? This is about jobs that need to be done to make our community better, right? And so when we do well, we acknowledge that. And when we don't do well, we need to address that. And it doesn't sound like we have any issue with acknowledging people for the things they do. It sounds like we have issue with accountability when things don't go right. And that's the problem. And so when things go wrong, there's a sense of, let's hurry up and make sure we tell everybody how great they're doing. And then we miss dealing with what happened. And that's a problem. If we continue down that road, that won't build bridges, that won't build trust, that won't do anything, but make community fall back even more from their elected officials and from people who are running the city. And so accountability is not a bad thing. It's not. It's checks and balances. Parents, we do this with our children all the time. And I realize that's a different dynamic, but and it's also something that it's taking so long to even deal with, right? I mean, I haven't been on this commission that long, but I've literally been in an accountability conversation more times than I would like to. At what point do we just cut to it and get to it?
Commissioner Cunningham?
I just wanted to state a couple of things. So as it pertains to the weekend, I know that KDPS will be doing an after action review. And then I also got confirmation from Jim last night that they will be putting the weekend's incidences and what led up to those incidences into the RFP as it pertains to the separate investigative body. So I know that for me, getting a better understanding of that timeline is one piece that on how soon we'll get that feedback. One piece that I think that the commission is probably curious about, but more importantly, the community. As it pertains to putting things into place moving forward. So historically, it's been evaluations because our form of accountability is evaluations of our appointees, and to some degree, I guess you could say, our budget. But that's what I've really been pushing for is forms of metrics, and that's why we have to define those metrics. So, that would be the other timeline piece, because previously our evaluations have had no formal metric measurements for us to say, for example, and I'm speaking to the community. Well, what we typically get is a report from each of our appointees, and I'm gonna use you as an example, Jim. And Jim will say, or I'm sorry, City Manager Ritzma, my apologies. The report will say, well, this year we accomplished this, but we have no benchmark to say whether that's success or failure. So if, for example, they say, well, we built 5 houses this year. Well, I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent if I don't have anything to benchmark it to. If we built 5 houses and our expectation was only to get 1, then that's success. But if we built 5 houses and our expectation was to get 30, then that's a form of failure. And so that's what I'm asking for as it pertains to KDPS. And if anybody that is currently on this Zoom meeting doesn't understand my ask, please, now is the perfect time to put out those questions. And I get it, there's a lot of ambiguity as it pertains to what that is, what that looks like, but that's the reason why we have to have this conversation, and it has to include the community. Because I have 3 items that may be very important to me, but in the grand scheme of what the community is actually looking for, it may not be. And not only once we narrow down what those 3, 4, 10, 20, 30 things are, then we can say, well, how do we measure that? What should be included? What shouldn't be included? And then that gives us at least a form of benchmark to do our evaluations based upon. And then it's easier to speak truth to power when you get halfway through the year and you don't have to get to evaluation time to say, hey, we're failing. This is the standard we set. We missed it. We missed it. We missed it. Versus kind of what we're dealing with right now, where 2 incidences have been brought forth. And both of them have rubbed me wrong. And then, the narrative is, well, Eric is just being overly aggressive based on, his life experiences, but that's not a reality. Reality is I take all of those things into consideration. My job has always been management 101. I always find time to lift up my colleagues. More importantly, going through these times, I try to find any officer that I run into. The first question I ask is, hey, how are you doing? How are you processing things? Stay positive. Your city commission, and correct me anybody if I'm wrong, we love you. We want you to, we don't want you to be in a negative headspace, but there's a job that we also have to do. So those are kind of my feelings and sentiments in regards to timelines and outcomes and what accountability may look like. Now, mind you, I don't want to be the sole bearer of what accountability looks like. So if there's other ideas and suggestions to create that accountability, I open that platform for you guys too.
May I make a suggestion here? And I'm asking you in a way, Vice Mayor Griffin, is that this conversation that we're having, includes components that are things that we're talking about, evaluation and longer term things, in particular accountability items, which I think most certainly deserve a great deal of focus on. Obviously, right now we are, 3/4 of the way through an evaluation year at this point, based on whatever criteria exists at the beginning of the year. So there's that portion of what we're talking about. And that's important work that we have to do, but that's not something we're going to change or satisfy, just in our conversation here this evening. So, but we can attempt to determine how soon that process to do that work will start, and we can determine then how to go about that work, which is the work of the commission, setting what our evaluation standards are going to be. But more so, I know you feel a sense of urgency about tonight, and I want to make sure that if there's a way that we can very clearly state in a simple, and measurable and concise way exactly what we would hope to leave tonight, if there's something related to this larger big picture thing, that we can be clear about that, and whether that's, I would really like to know about this by Monday, or we are going to set a meeting, for example, you and I meeting with the city manager, before the end of the week, and we're going to ask for this to come back, and we'll let people know by Friday when we're getting answers to things. Is there something just particular related to that we could do that you feel would be, a meaningful way to move forward.
Yes, I think that we can, as a commission, we can put a time frame on creating a standard or accountability measures for City Manager Ritzema, because we are probably past due on that anyways. So we should be able to put a date on that. And then City Manager Ritzema, and we've been talking all around you, perhaps he does have an account. So let me backtrack. City Manager Ritzema is accountable to us, and we need to set those parameters and get a timeline on when we're going to have those done. I would like to, before we get off of this call or before we end this meeting. The other component of that, which City Manager Ritzema may, I believe Commissioner Knott addressed this before in her comments, and if I'm wrong in her comments, I could be wrong, and my apologies. But City Manager Ritzema may have a plan to hold Chief accountable for some of the things that happened this weekend, and we just don't know what that is. So we need a clear understanding on what that looks like, so that the community can get a clear understanding of what that looks like. And then we as a body need to set a time frame for having accountability measures for City Manager Ritzema.
So I'm going to subdivide that question. I mean, is the portion of it, Manager Ritzema, do you feel like you can answer a portion of that question that Vice Mayor asked?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in here, and I do appreciate this discussion. I think it's time for this. I think let's talk about protests for a moment. And we, public safety, city administration, we don't know what a successful protest looks like. Is it no arrests, no property damage, no one injured, political fallout? I mean, it seems like every event, the expectation has changed. And so I want to know from the commission what that expectation is for an event. And that our officers are deserve that, to know what the standard is, what's the expectation. These events come in, we don't control it. You got contingency plans and all of that. There's got to be consideration for some of that. We're not perfect and we can't anticipate anything. We provided plans beforehand, like it or not. It was developed with an organizer and all of that. We got nothing back from the commission. And now everyone's questioning the plans. And that's really difficult to work with, with public safety, especially given the enormity of what's happening. And every single event seems to be public safety, city administration holding the bag. And, that's fine. That's why we get paid to do what we do, but we deserve it for our officers to have these expectations set up. And that's what I'm looking for right now. What is First Amendment expectation? What is marching in the street? What is, damaging property? Where are those parameters? Because our officers right now are wondering what the hell is going on. And it's difficult. And so I think we deserve to give them what they're looking for, and that is standards. I need it too, because if I don't know what the expectation is, next week, some other organization comes in and we're left, okay, now what? We're in our frozen in our tracks because we don't know what to do. And, so I'm asking that from the commission, and whether that's, ordinance, policies, let's talk about that. And that could be a start for, what happened this weekend. I will deal with the, planning for the event. I mean, obviously we've got a lot of work to do. And I heard loud and clear last night that there were some things that we can do, and that's including people up front. I get that. We need to know who to include. If you're there, commissioners, or you think some other organization should be there, we need to know that, because without that, we just don't know what is going to happen, other than the intel we get and the information we can garner on social media or whatever. So that would help us tremendously with this. And then holding us accountable is, that's part of it. But if the bar and the target keep moving protest to protest, that's not fair.
Jim, can I ask you a question? For when I was working at Western for the student activities office, they had kind of like a risk scale to determine like what level of response. So there was like almost like a scale of evaluation based on like different criteria to determine, like, is this an event where we just need one officer at? Is this an event that we need, to ask for reinforcement, from other jurisdictions? Is this an event where we need to like figure out how to close off the area? Can you describe that a little bit to say, is there like a scale to determine like the response and at what level? I mean, is it like a clear, like numeric, rating system almost to determine that? Because that to me is valuable.
Or Commissioner Pareto, I'm going to have to defer that to public safety, the intricacies of that. What I can say is, and the chief has said this before about this, whatever they find or discover on social media or information they receive from people, that becomes the nugget of information that they work from, that something may be happening. And based on that, they continue to build on that nugget to find out as much information they can garner. And from that, you get to a date that I guess was announced August 15th. And, the day before, with all of that information, all of those folks coming together from every angle, city attorney, the city manager staff and public safety, they draft the best plan possible. And it comes down to, how are we going to staff this as far as number? And that's a really difficult piece of it too, because you go back to the June 1st event, we were sorely understaffed. And that's why we had to call in all of the resources we did. Well, this time around, we had the amount of resources as far as staffing goes, 100 plus officers from different jurisdictions and whatnot. But, the deployment was, we deployed based on what we felt was going to happen. And then things change. And then obviously the plan is meant to evolve for that change. So you start out with a plan. And part of that is the risk assessment. Yeah. Let's take the Proud Boys. Of course, we knew they were, far right, fascist organization, and we tried to take that into account. But on the flip side, we were led to believe it was going to be a peaceful protest on that side. And people showed up with weapons. And now what? So now we're having to adjust based on that. And so, it's a fluid thing, but we start with the best information we can and build off from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely hear that, at times like these where there, wide and varied situations where you might have a peaceful community protest to the range of a violent protest to societal, reactionary protest that happens. Each one has unique needs and qualities. Yeah, I mean, sometimes I'm sure it feels like an impossible task, but I think it is on us, and it's on us to figure out a way to make sure that we can convey clearly what's acceptable and not. And I think from our perspective, to be honest and candid, this is where it's frustrating for us, because it feels like when we want to have the conversation about how to give those standards and how to give that accountability, it feels like the first reaction is the knee-jerk reaction is that we're out to get you. It's retaliatory, that we only think that something, we only think badly of you, and I think that's where the problem is, and that's why I'm so glad and thank you, Vice Mayor, while we're having this conversation, is because like I said last night with the questions, like I mean absolutely no ill intent towards you or Chief Thomas or the officers when I'm asking those questions, that I would be derelict in my duty if I didn't ask them. And in my opinion, you would be in yours if you didn't respond to them. And so, I think that's the challenge that we're in here in this situation, is that unless we are willing together to, look each other and trust each other enough to understand that this is an ecosystem that we're in together, where we're, ultimately all accountable to the public, but understanding that, we are here to try to, proactively think through so that these things don't happen, to make, officers' life better in the future. I think back to the body cam footage, the body cams. Do you remember back in the day when people were introducing body cams and how much backlash that, public safety departments and officers had against that? And, police unions were against it and whatnot. But look at today. Now the vast majority of officers embrace it because they understand that it's as much of a protection to them it is to the public that they serve. And so, sometimes you don't even know as a person about, how it could actually benefit everybody involved. And so we just got to be willing to embrace the fact that accountability is not a bad thing, and I appreciate you holding us accountable to say, like, look, like, it's not just on us, we're looking to you because we need some direction as well. I think that's a fair assessment. That's totally fair.
Commissioner Urban?
There you go. Well, to move things along, I'm getting the sense that having some clarity from City Manager Ritzema, it seems to me it's quite urgent that he gets some pretty clear direction from the commission on what the hierarchy of standards are for what looks like success from a encounter with public demonstrations and events. So I'm going to just put out there, not as a motion or anything yet, but as a point of moving the discussion along, that the next work session we have, which is should be before the retreat, in my opinion, to get going on this, because a lot can happen in 3 weeks. Have a work session just to discuss the clarity that City Manager Ritzman needs on what are we going to call success in dealing with police community relations. And I think if each of us prepare their own list, say of 5 success criteria, and prioritize them privately, we could bring those to the next meeting, and then we could discuss the ups and downs and the pluses and minuses of each one, and then rank them all as a body and come out with one set of rankings that has some sticking power, because it's the product of our joint deliberation. So that's my proposal for discussion.
Commissioner Cunningham, go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight, I know that KDPS is the primary focus right now, and this is a piece, only one piece of the bigger picture. I also think that we should be coming up with, metrics as it pertains to all of our appointees, and things that we want to measure that way. When it comes around time for our evaluations, we can effectively, say yay, nay, or indifferent versus just going based upon emotional response, or, the different measurements that I'm sure 7 people will have 7 different measurements in regards to our appointees.
So, I agree with you 100%, Commissioner Cunningham, and people have to know what they're being evaluated on, and they should know that at the beginning of the period that they're being evaluated. You cannot do retroactive evaluation. That's not fair for anybody. So we need to know that. We have grappled for a long time, and I think a lot of institutions do, with evaluation tools how do you measure in a real substantive way? And I guess one way you do that, as you mentioned, Commissioner Cunningham, is you try to incorporate some data, some metrics into those sorts of things. That is not something that we're going to create just here tonight or even in a work session. So, and I think this is a big enough and important enough thing. When I think about issue after big issue after big issue that we have dealt with on the City Commission, and whether I'm even talking about things like, the ordinance that was in front of us tonight, whether we're thinking about, way back to 2009 and our human rights ordinance that passed, whether we're talking about the legacy costs when we had a huge problem with the fact that we did not, we're not sufficiently funded for the medical payment responsibilities that belong to the city. Time after time, when there was specific work that needed to occur, we created a subcommittee to work very diligently on that and begin to put a framework together. So we're not just showing up, on a given evening and kind of trying to figure that out. We have a subcommittee that can do that work and begin to put a framework around it and begin to do some of those proposals. So I suggest that this issue writ large, we do that. I think it's a very functional way to get that work done, is to create a subcommittee to do that work. I am more than happy to be on that subcommittee, or if other people think it'd be better for other folks to be on it, fine. So I'm proposing that. And then just for this evening though, if there's some discrete item, some discrete request that we want to make sure we leave from tonight and ask Jim, we need to know about this, this, and this, and please let us know by Monday or whatever it is, we can do that discrete request as well. So I'm trying to keep these things, kind of the scope of work reflecting the work that needs to be done. Does that resonate with anybody, that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I'm open to anything, I'm open to anything as long as it's going to move the needle and we're going to keep moving with it, but I think the hard part is like, how do you do that in a fashion that still makes sure that the public feels like they're hearing and part of it? And so, the only reservation I would have about the subgroups is how do we make sure that we keep all of our inputs so the public can hold us all accountable about how we're feeling and how we're moving things.
That can be totally incorporated in it. For example, when the subcommittee did the work on our legacy liabilities, Mr. Pradle, or when that work was done related to revenue, remember that? You participated in that. So even though that might have been subcommittee work to some extent, those were open meetings, those, had a lot of opportunity for input. So you can, if that expectation, goes along with the subcommittee work, I mean, it will be incorporated. That will be one of the things we will incorporate into that work. And I'm not saying we couldn't have work sessions around it also. Just saying, how do we bring the kind of focus we need to, to move, these issues, now and forward, and make sure we have a good product, in place for, our evaluation going forward. Commissioner Urban.
Well, my suggestion then to move things along a little faster is to ask for tonight. Our ask would be for the city manager to prepare a bunch of success criteria that he's already named some of them, to give this a little bit more thought, and then present to us the success criteria that he can see being in play for measuring success in dealing with protests. And then when he presents that to us, then it's up to us to have a discussion on prioritizing those things. And that's where the richness of our input will come. But I think we owe it to the person who's going to be carrying out the work to get his input, because it's very demoralizing to tell somebody who's very intelligent and very resourceful that we're going to order you to do this and not get their input first, because he's an intelligent person with a lot of experience and he has a lot to offer. We need to hear him first, but the people who are on this subcommittee need to be both Commissioner Griffin and Commissioner Cunningham for sure. The majority on that subcommittee needs to be people of color. Otherwise, it's not going to be credible. Now that's moving things along a little bit. Let's talk about it.
Manager Ritzman.
Yeah. Again, I really appreciate this discussion. I think this is where we need to be on this part of it relative to protests. I'm going to echo what the vice mayor said earlier. We need this yesterday. We don't know when the next event's being planned. And if we have an event planned between now and this work, we're potentially being set up for failure again. So I suggest that this work be done either this week, starting this week, and I'll even propose a goal that by X date next week, we have this flushed out and we can bring that back because again, our officers, our public safety staff and administration need to have this to function and function successfully. And that's, I think we all want that. So, if we can get that done, I think that's the first step. And relative to what's happened in the past, we've already talked about what the plan is in the action plan. And if things need to be adjusted, let us know and we can, work through that with the action plan relative to public safety. So I'm just going to stop there and put that there right now as a marker that we need to do this ASAP.
Commissioner Knott.
Yes, so just quickly building off of what the city manager said, I would support getting the work going with the date of next week by COB, close of business next Friday, the 28th, that there's a report back to the commission that we can send out to the public as well. And to build off of that, to the mayor's question about, do we have a discrete item? Last night I called for answers to when we might, be able to confidently say we've looked at the intelligence related to the videos and the intelligence related to Proud Boy members that committed acts of violence and crimes. I'm not necessarily anticipating that by the 28th, we're going to have a number of arrest warrants, but that's a solid week and a half out. And we'll have more information by COB on the 28th for you to give us an update that here's the process, here's the hours of video, here's whatever that the police officers that are reviewing this footage are anticipating we might be able to. And again, I heard you last night say that it took several weeks of reviewing footage from previous, I think it was in Grand Rapids incidences. So I understand that it's not going to be a quick fix, but I think that it would be helpful if we had a plan based on a week and a half more of reviewing and taking a look at just what the lift is going to be so that we can provide that information to the community as well. And I'm sorry, one more footnote to that. Whether it's Clyde or the city manager's office, or if it's law enforcement, but somebody having a conversation with the prosecuting attorney's office that this work is going to happen and we expect full cooperation and prosecution of cases.
So may I, Manager Ritzman?
I'm sorry, I just want to clarify, Commissioner Knott, the review of video relative to the events that occurred, that review is going to be based on any criminal activity that was observed. So, I just want to put that out there that everything is going to be looked at with that lens. And, if, like I said last night, if we need to issue warrants against the Proud Boys, we will do so. But it works both ways.
And I appreciate that. I think, though, if we had just a check-in in terms of, 2 weeks have passed since the incident, but we've now plowed through 152 hours of video and we have 15 possible, arrest warrants in the works right now. Just something that we can show to the public that we're taking this serious. We recognize that there was an absolute violent melee, and that there are probably folks that are members of the Proud Boys that will be receiving arrest warrants because we've done the investigative work based on here's the crime that happened, and then we've been able to track them down and identify them.
Yeah, that would be great. We can keep everyone updated based on that timeline.
Jim, another component as well that I'm sorry. No, Eric, you had your hand up before. The other component as well that I think is really important that we heard pretty loud and clear from the public is just, the ability to make sure that people who should be independent parts of protests, whether it be media or public observers. And so what does that look like to make sure that never happens again? Is it a collection and training of symbols that those individuals use to make sure that that they're off limits? Is it, as soon as a person has identified themselves as one of those individuals, that there's a second review from a management in public safety that comes in to review before a person is, cuffed. You know what I'm saying? I feel like there needs to be some mechanism that the community needs to hear back on and how we make sure that doesn't happen. And so maybe that's a review of policy and some recommendations of review and policy to make sure that doesn't happen. And again, that's to protect those individuals, but also if I was a public safety officer, I would be horrified if I knew that I had accidentally, arrested somebody in one of those classifications. And so, to think that it's just, that directive is not meant to just, be retaliatory against public safety officers. It's again to protect everybody.
Absolutely, Commissioner Praedel, and we can make that part of this plan.
Commissioner Cunningham.
I just wanted clarification. I know we don't have a motion on the floor, but we're discussing a subcommittee. What are the expectations surrounding the subcommittee, if somebody can?
Well, thank you, Commissioner Cunningham. I was actually going to come back to that and see whether that actually resonated with anyone or not. We had kind of a half of the proposal that I'm not even sure if we have to take a motion on this, to tell you the truth. Attorney Robinson can tell us whether we do or not. We can talk here and we can agree and go forward. I'm not sure if we have to motion everything, but and maybe we do. I'll let Attorney Robinson answer that. So we got one piece that Commissioner Knott, just proposed here, a time frame. I was asking for some discrete suggestions. Commissioner Praedel, proposed a couple of those things. So I'm going to add on top of that and say, okay, why don't we do this work? Why don't we create at least a short-term subcommittee to work with Jim to help on that? And I was going to suggest that subcommittee could meet as soon as there's open time in the schedule. If that's tomorrow, that would be fine with me, to kind of help assist if it's necessary, to make sure we have a successful outcome on this for this first step of this between now, for example, and the 28th. Yes, Commissioner Cunningham.
So in that case, what I'm advising probably will be, yes, organize the subcommittee. The subcommittee takes a list of items from each commissioner that we would like timelines on, and then determine what that timeline is. And the main reason why I asked for clarification is I wanted to make sure that whether or not this was something we needed to get. I think we needed to get community input on. But as of right now, I do not think we need community input on that subcommittee. If we're just getting timelines together, and then we can go from there.
I appreciate that. Manager Ritzman.
Thank you. And Commissioner Cunningham, I'm just thinking through this, that we actually need the standards, and we're past needing a timeline. Again, we could have a protest on Saturday that we don't control when they occur. So those standards we need ASAP. Yeah, I don't know if that's what you're referring to as a timeline. I just wanted clarification.
So that will be an item that needs a timeline, and as it pertains to when we want to get those standards out.
Gotcha.
If you're talking about actually doing that, then that component, I believe, needs to have community input also. So it's got to, and that can be, you know, I won't, that could be done in an open meeting and not necessarily in the subcommittee. But I think that we should have a laundry list of items and then sit down and determine what's the timeline on each one of those items. Obviously, Ritzma, you would have to be an integral piece on that piece. And that would be the reason for this subcommittee. But correct me if I was in the wrong lane.
Did that add some clarity, Manager Ritzma?
I guess just to be real clear, we're going to have expectations around protests. Those, what does success look like? My understanding was commissioners were going to get what they see success being in protests and give that to the subcommittee, and we'll distill that down into the parameters around a protest. And then we can take that information and build it into a action plan, not action plan, but, you know, a plan when events occur, and everyone knows up front what those expectations are.
That also gives an opportunity for each one of us to act as a conduit for community,
right?
You know, participation in terms of ideas coming forward. Commissioner Hess.
Is this a place where CSPRAB might also have some information for us?
We can ask for CSCRAB feedback. In my estimation, commission needs to take this on, you know, do the work. I think that's another source, Commissioner Hess. I appreciate that, but I'd like to see us, you know, get, you know, commission led and get this work moving forward. So I just want to, okay, Commissioner Praedel.
I was just going to mention as well, I know like organizations like MML, you know, have public policy experts and analysts and whatnot, and, you know, national organizations as well that we could potentially reach out to and ask for. I mean, we pay membership for them, and it might be an opportunity for us to ask them to help us, you know, look for some best practices and some research about what other communities are doing around the country or around the state as well.
Good idea. So is somebody writing down all these good ideas?
Yeah, I'm jotting down a lot.
Okay. Commissioner Urban.
Well, yeah, I think what Commissioner Praedel just suggested, but the thing is, that sounds like something that he would like to take on himself to do. And if he can do that within the timeline, the time frame that we're working on, that's terrific. That's just the kind of energy and commitment and focus we need from each one of us. He's practically spoken up for what he wants to do already. If he agrees, that's great. If the rest of us can chime in with the things that we're going to either feed to the subcommittee or actually help be on the subcommittee to do, we're making progress.
Manager Ritzma?
Yeah, maybe I need to restate this a little differently. What we need right now today is what are the expectations around arrests, property damage, you know, political fallout, those real just basic expectations that will become a part of an operational plan for an event. Again, we could have an event Saturday, and we're based on everything we're talking about here, we're talking about several days, if not weeks, you know, to get where we want to be relative to the greater discussion about some of those larger issues, which is fine, but we need something by Friday. I'm just
Commissioner Cunningham. Thank you.
To speak to Jim's concerns, I think it would take a panel and a lot more work than a discussion that we can have right now on our expectations. What we can say is, we can't have that discussion without KDPS being at the table.
Right.
I don't think that would be wise under any circumstance. So to be fair, you're not going to get that outcome, at least for me, tonight as it pertains to how do we get that as soon as possible. Once again, I think that is a part of the frustration that the community is having, because myself and everyone else, we want it done right now. But myself, personally, I understand that there are a lot of different variables that need to come into play. And what you're asking for is essentially, what we would consider a union. If you've seen a union contract, it's about, a book, it's about that long. And so that's kind of how in detail that process might have to be and go to. So that's why, my assumption was the subcommittee was working on, let's set up timelines with realistic expectations, figure out who needs to come to the table for, those discussions within each timeline that we're all requiring. Yeah, I guess that's my statements towards it.
So may I suggest, I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Griffin.
That's okay. I just wanted to jump in here really quickly because what I'm hearing from city manager is something more immediate. And so what I hear is, if we as a commission, or if this was in place before last week happened, one of my suggestions would be, and I don't know what law enforcement, the details, because I'm not a law enforcement officer, but my overarching thing would have been, bare minimum, we've got a known violent group, then your response should be according to that. And that's something that's very simple, that's very baseline, that doesn't take a whole lot of meetings, that doesn't take a whole lot of anything, that's just pretty basic. And if it sounds like if we could have been able to give that overarching to City Manager Ritzema ahead of this weekend, possibly that could have impacted how things were handled. That's just what I'm hearing. And so what I don't want to do is overcomplicate. If there is a conversation, if there's an ask for guidance on how we move forward, we need to be able to do that for as much as we can do, get that out to the community and build on that. Because if something happens tomorrow, we're having this conversation right now. We can't afford another instance, another incident, another piece of trauma, hardships for everybody involved. So that's what I'm hearing from City Manager Ritzema. And so that's something that I feel like we should be able to start baseline and then build on. And that just kind of goes back to something that I brought up in previous commission meetings about where's the mechanism for community to be involved in how they're policed? Because we had a lot of community members who voice their concerns about the handling of this situation, ahead of time. So maybe they should have been involved, because there are people who do this work all the time, right? I'm not an expert on Proud Boys, but there are people who maybe, and I'm just using it as an example, who may know how to operate, who could have helped, in that strategic building of that process. So that's what I'll say to that. And the time frame, yes, we need to get that to City Manager Ritzema yesterday and build from that. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be the end all fix all, but we need to move in a direction of change immediately. And so the other component I would just like to add on to what Commissioner Knott's request was, is for you, City Manager, to review the tapes of the arrests of the legal observer and the media, and give us some feedback on what's going to happen. I think Commissioner Cunningham may have mentioned this yesterday, right? And mistakes happen, I understand that, but looking at the video, is this a mistake? And I know you mentioned that, City Manager Ritzema, yesterday, all of these different things about what could have happened. Those things should be on tape, and we should be able to get to that like very quickly, and then address that moving forward, and let us know if, what's going to be happening with those officers, if they have a history of doing anything like that. and those are the sort of outcomes and information that the community needs to know. And we can put that on a timeline for sooner than later, or I would like to include that in the timeline that Commissioner Knott has already said, and I believe that was the 28th.
Yeah.
If we can get that by the 28th on those two instances. And I realize that Mayor Anderson has already asked for those charges to be dropped for everyone. Perhaps by the 28th, we can get that information as well. I realize that may not be in your wheelhouse, but communication back out about what's happening with that would be nice.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. That's very helpful. So what about this too? If we know of an upcoming event while we're working on this process and, starting with something and building off that into what we actually want to see success look like, with a known event coming up, and hopefully we know it, several days in advance, I would suggest too that we be able to work with this subgroup, because Vice Mayor, you hit it spot on, is what group should we be talking to? We always try to find organizers for these events, but we don't, there's several groups in a protest sometimes. And so just having that help from you all to know, or someone in the community that knows, that would be very helpful too on the front end. So we can develop an operational plan that we hope encompasses everything that needs to be encompassed when the event occurs.
So, Commissioner Pradel.
Sorry, Jim, you mentioned a few things that you felt like were things that officers feel very uncertain about right now.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned arrests, property damage, political fallout. Would it be possible for you to work with public safety? And again, not necessarily getting this from leadership, but some ability to get from actual frontline officers who are challenged with this in these situations, the ones that are really facing it, having to make these real-time, difficult decisions on the spot, asking them, for a list of what are the things that you just don't feel like you have a concrete direction on, because that would help guide us as well. To make it so, look, you gave us the list, so we want to make sure that we give you the absolute clear definition of what's acceptable and what's not, so that there's no murkiness for them when they're faced with those situations. Would that be something that would be possible?
Oh, absolutely. I love that idea. And that's something, I should say this overall based on what I've been saying, that this would all include in public safety in these conversations. So I'm not going to be able to be the knowledge master on all of them. But yeah, Chris, I think that would be great to hear that feedback, because that's what they need to know, that their concerns are, understood, or at least expectations are understood. And what better way to do that than, hear what they have to say.
Because they can tell us, these are the things that I feel very insecure about making decisions on. But we're coming from a lens of, we know what the community is telling us that is acceptable and not acceptable. So that gives us the ability to use the megaphone from the community and what we're hearing from people to say this is acceptable, this is not acceptable,
Yeah.
So I'm going to pull back to this idea again. I don't want it to get lost, that we do indeed authorize a subcommittee to start doing this work. And maybe Commissioner Cunningham, some of the very early work, we can describe it as interim measures or whatever, to get some things in place. And granted, over the course of time, maybe those will become more sophisticated, or, include, a greater level of detail. But it seems like there is some urgency from manager, city manager here, to try to begin to put some things together. I think we can do those interim measures and expectations, reasonably quickly, within days, I'm thinking, as far as that starting point, as we build on that. So is there, an appetite for that? I guess I'm just asking that again. Is there an appetite for doing that work? Do you think it would be helpful to have a subcommittee? If so, who wants to be in that subcommittee? And then how soon do we want to start meeting? Commissioner Urban?
Well, I would like to see Patrice be on the subcommittee for sure, because she has the clearest focus right now, in my mind, of what's needed short term. So I think that we're likely to get crisp results with her involvement in this. Other commissioners, I'm more willing to take suggestions, but Eric has a much more comprehensive thing that he wants to accomplish, and I'm a little concerned that may get conflated with something that needs to be done short term. Eric's work is vital, but it's long term. What I'm thinking what needs to happen here is something that needs to happen if Eric's going to be on it, with the understanding that it needs to be completed within about a week or less. So if people want to step forward and be a volunteer to be on that committee, go after it. But I'm strongly recommending that Patrice be one of the people that's on it.
Well, I appreciate that. We can nominate each other, but so in general, is there an appetite from the commission to enter in this subcommittee process? I can't really even tell whether that's there or not.
Yes.
Is
Yes,
there?
and I'll serve.
Okay. Then if that's the case, how do we want to choose the 3 people that are going to be on here? Do we want to have some broader discussion about it? Want to have people volunteer? How do we want to do that?
I'll just speak and say I can be on the committee.
Okay, so someone else would like to be on it.
I would love to as well. I mean, if it's opportunity, but I'm also
Commissioner Pradel and Commissioner Cunningham. So we got 3 folks. So I've just been kicked off the committee. So I was thinking when I was proposing to form this will be a committee of 3 that I would be on that. I'm totally fine to not be on it. I'm just going to say, don't be careless, but work in haste. So now we have a slate of 3. Do we need to vote on this, Attorney Robinson? Do we need to make some kind of a motion?
My advice is yes.
All right.
I think there's been, the discussion has been very wide ranging. And in order to put real parameters on what it is that you're doing, I think you need to go through the motion process of creating a subcommittee that maybe has a particular lifetime to it. That's what I understood, that this committee is going to have its work done by the 28th. That was one of the suggestions. It's also, I think, important to define the scope of what is the committee is expected to do in the next 10 days. And again, there was a very wide-ranging discussion. I think that people were taking notes, but it's a little unclear to me exactly what it is that we're doing, other than there seems to be some urgency so as to give guidance to the manager and others and the public safety department as to how are we going to handle the next public gathering. Other than that, it's a little unclear as to because there's a lot of directions, a lot of good information and ideas that were shared, but I think you need to distill it down as to what can you get done in the next 10 days.
Thank you.
That's part of the work. And then, of course, there's an extended part of the work, too, we've been talking about. So is this the same subcommittee that's going to do that? Well, maybe not. I guess we can figure that out. So I guess for now, we can just make this be a short-term work and we can revisit that. Are people okay with?
We can always extend.
I'm sorry.
We can always extend the scope of work for the subcommittee and the timeline.
Okay. So at this point, I am looking for a motion defining then a time frame and the work of this subcommittee that we can move forward with right now.
Well, I'll try to help everybody out. I think the motion should be that the commissioner moves to appoint Vice Mayor Griffin, Commissioner Pradel, and Commissioner Cunningham to a committee for the purpose of fill in the blank, what is it you want it to do, and to have a report and to work with the city manager and have a report out by August 28th.
I think part of like your conversation about the scope, Clyde, though, is, defining that problem. And, City Manager Ritzma, I heard you define the most immediate problem that needs to be resolved is what does a successful outcome look like for any protest or large gathering. And do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, you got that correct.
So, it would seem to me that maybe the initial scope of this group is defining what a positive outcome, what we deem a positive outcome from any kind of protest or violent gathering would be. I don't know what terminology you'd want to use, but something along those lines.
Large public event.
Well, the only thing about that is it's like, are we talking about Rib Fest here? Or are we talking about, people gathering to, protest something or a hate group coming to Kalamazoo? So how do you differentiate between those things?
Manager Ritzma?
The subcommittee.
I would just start right now by protests, demonstrations, anything that could have variables to it on how it works, whether it's a march or a demonstration at Bronson Park. I would just limit it right now to that subset because that's what we're dealing with right now, and that I think would help us tremendously.
Potential members of the subcommittee, is that an acceptable scope of work for you at this point?
I have no objections. I think I just got a thought towards it. Once again, that's going to be a tall task for my colleagues. It's still going to be a tall task to do. From a standpoint of there are a million different variables that can take place. I think to answer it shortly, the answer is to walk away with the community feeling safe and protected. So how do we measure that? Because that can become, that in itself is very rough. But I guess we can narrow that down. We can say walk away with, this weekend over as an example, walk away with African Americans feeling X, Y, and Z because we know that the Proud Boys intentionally X, Y, and Z. Or I don't know. Just some thoughts towards trying to really what that zeroing in expectation is, whether it's quantifiable or whether it's, well, if it's qualitative or qualitative type of guidelines.
I think it's a tall order. I agree with you, but I think there's a sense of urgency around that. And I think, Commissioner Cunningham, this is not going to be a finished forever in a day document. This is going to be a way to build some groundwork, for now, and perhaps will contribute to further thinking in the future. But I think that will be helpful. So, I hope I'm not feeling like I'm kind of pushing this too hard, but I do want us to get to something here on this and get to something real that we're going to have a time frame and we're going to work on and get out of this. So if this is acceptable, this idea, I don't know how we're going to frame it for our actual motion. Maybe City Attorney Robinson, you had the rest of it. You left a blank for the scope of work piece. So I don't know if you want to just think about that a little bit from what you've heard.
If I may, I think the way that Commissioner Pradel encapsulated it is probably the best way to put it, or maybe the way Jim, Commander Richma, articulated it, something along those lines. It is going to be a tall order, but I think the desire of the commission, the consensus seems to be, let's get this work started and let's get if you will, a shovel in the ground so as we can start laying a foundation.
You know, you talk about the success of a protest, and I think back to the June incident, and I remember something that really stuck with me and resonated was that I remember Chief Thomas, and I think City Manager Ritzma, you said something to this effect too, is after that protest, when you saw what was happening around the country and you knew that nobody was killed, there was not one injury, you know, that all the officers went home uninjured. You know, when you went to bed, in your initial assessment, you were thinking, well, hey, this went great. There was no property damage. Nobody was harmed. But what wasn't realized is from the community's perspective of that outcome, that it wasn't an acceptable outcome, right? And so I think that's where we talk about where we can reconcile. And if we just use the terminology, what does a successful outcome look like for this community? Then we reconcile those components to determine, you know, that, you know, this is what the community sees as a successful outcome. This is what we as leaders of this community see as a successful outcome. We just use the broad stroke. And yeah, like you say, Eric, it's a super tall order, but at least, you know, let's start there for maybe a guidepost.
Manager Ritzma?
Okay, I'll just be real brief. I love what you said, Chris, or Commissioner Prado. You know, the idea of gathering input from the officers, that could start tomorrow. And we need the expertise from public safety brought together with you as commissioners and administration. And I'm going to suggest that Clyde also be involved. I don't want to volunteer him, but I think it's critical to have Clyde or someone on his staff involved in this as well, as there's typically a lot of legal questions to it. So just blending all that together, the expertise with the community input, and I think we will be well on our way towards something that will work.
Thank you, Manager Ritzma. Commissioner Cunningham.
And so with kind of elaborating on what City Manager stated, to my colleagues, and then to city administration too, if we're including that of the opinions of the KDPS officers and their expertise, then we should find some ways to bring the community in on that conversation.
Totally.
So and I say that because that means city administration will have to kind of schedule around it. We will have to, you know, create some formal interaction within the next 10 days.
Just to clarify that, Eric, you know, I think thinking in broad terms, yes, but for a specific event, what I was thinking is, you know, in real time for that event, who should we be talking to? I mean, we're going to get 100 different opinions on what success looks like. We need to know right now, you know, at this level, what success looks like. And I think that is best done on a case-by-case basis on the events, and then, you know, kind of develop the process and then work that process and improve on it as we move forward.
Maybe we could also, you know, one of the first tasks that the three of us could develop are like, who are all the people that we think have the most valuable opinions to contribute to this equation? You know, because like for me, like definitely like the observer that was arrested, definitely, you know, a member of the media, you know, I mean, definitely, you know, some key community organizers who have organized protests before, you know, people who have familiarity with the hate groups, you know, I mean, so, you know, maybe if we develop that list of people, you know, we could each divvy up the list and each reach out to those individuals and kind of collectively come back and report back to what each of them says. But, you know, I'm totally with you, Commissioner Cunningham, as well, about your thought about the community input. I don't, you know, even if it's just making sure that our emails are all published, you know, so that people have an opportunity to chime in and, you know, we just ask a simple question from the community, and we can do it tonight for people to do it, to say, you know, email the three of us and tell us, what does a successful outcome of a protest look like to you, blank, you know?
So I'm hearing a lot of good conversation, and I know there's always scope of work creep. And I want to make sure that we don't bite off more than we can chew for this short time frame just for this initial product, so we can successfully accommodate this, in terms of getting some things in place for starters, which we all want. And I don't want to be dismissive of, a whole variety of people want to talk to and all kinds of community input, which is all great. But let's just, if we can, use the connections we have, get this work done. Maybe part of what this work is setting the table for further community engagement. I mean, maybe that's part of that. But that said, I was just going to roll back to this idea of what a motion might look like.
Well, I think the clerk has sent me an email as to a suggested motion, and I think he's got it well in hand. I'll let him take charge.
Clerk Borling.
Well, under the category of it's sometimes easier to react to something that's there. How about something like this, that the motion would be to appoint Vice Mayor Griffin, Commissioner Cunningham, and Commissioner Pradel to work with the city manager to develop a definition of success for the city's response to public protests, demonstrations, and rallies that can be used to guide the planning and execution of that response. And that a report be provided to the City Commission by August 28th.
Commissioner Hess?
I'll move that.
I'll support it.
And is there support? Commissioner Urban, discussion?
Do you want input from all of us as to what we would consider successful outcomes?
I want to caution the commission about that a little bit, because when you create a subcommittee, obviously they're going to be making a recommendation that will the entire commission will take action on in terms of accepting the report and whatever steps that will be put in place. So you want to be very careful. I think while we did talk about public input, this work, in order to get it done expediently, is going to have to be done outside of the scope of the Open Meetings Act. And so you have to be careful about having other commissioners who are not on the subcommittee giving input. You're basically delegating to the commissioners who you're appointing to the subcommittee to do that work. So you have to be a little careful about that. I would suggest that if you've got ideas, that they be channeled perhaps through the city manager best for that, and he can then share if you really feel the need to have input. But I would caution you on getting too involved, because then you start to look like you're doing an end run around the Open Meetings Act.
Thank you, Attorney.
Manager Ritzman.
Yeah, just a thought occurred to me. Having the information, the report presented to the commission on the 28th, I think another step in transparency could be that report is also presented at the next commission meeting after the 28th to the public, so everyone understands what the expectations are.
I can add an addendum, or is that can just be understood?
Yeah, that can be understood. I don't think you have to amend the motion, because the point of the matter is, in order to make sure you do comply with the Open Meetings Act, there's going to have to be city commission action on the report.
All right, good people. Is there any other discussion? Vice Mayor Griffin?
I don't have a discussion point necessarily so much as clarifying to community. So this motion is going to mean myself, Commissioner Cunningham, Commissioner Pradel form a subcommittee. We can call in community members to be a part of that with the intention of having a very quick turnaround to deal with the issue that has been laid out in front of us. And so it's about what a successful protest looks like. And just to be clear, that's not, the answers are going to be different. A person or a group or people who are protesting a certain issue their definition of success might look like policy change or the removal of someone from office or from a position. That's very different from what the scope of what I believe City Manager Ritzema is looking for in terms of how is success defined for that. So just to be very clear on that, and just to reiterate to the community, yet this is not, yes, this will be closed door just by nature of the way it is, but it is not without community input. So just to make sure the community is clear on that. And these are the first steps of where we've been trying to get to for quite some time, getting community involved and how they are policed. So we are starting here.
And Vice Mayor, I'm sorry to interject.
Yeah, go. No, it's fine.
But building off what Commissioner Cunningham said of what ultimate success is, the community feels safe. And then we can break that down into, okay, there are different components of safety, so I see starting here and just building out from there, with the expertise and the community input that you all bring, I think will be very successful.
Any other discussion on the motion? Clerk Borling, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Pradel,
Yes.
Commissioner Urban,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Griffin,
Yes.
Mayor Anderson.
Yes, I thought I was going to get to participate in this, but I'm looking forward to a fantastic report.
Commissioner Cunningham,
Yes.
Commissioner Hess,
Yes.
and Commissioner Knott.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Is there other work or conversation we need to have tonight? Manager Ritzman.
Want to be clear on, what Commissioner Knott and Vice Mayor Griffin raised as other things they would like to have by the 28th. So I have the review of videos related to the arrest of the two individuals, the MLive person and the lawyer. And we work or inform the prosecutor's office to cooperate in all of this and provide a plan in play that we can implement right away to prevent that the arrests in the future of those that are trying to help with the organization of the event. Did I miss anything?
I don't see any responses. Attorney Robinson, were you about to say something?
No.
Okay,
That sounds good to me.
all right. All right. At this point then, I am thinking that we're ready to adjourn this meeting 25 and a half hours after it started. So seeing no pushback on that, I just want to say thank you so much for everybody's thoughtful and determined work. And this is how we're going to keep doing this work going forward. We're going to do it together. To the community, we need everyone's input. This is not, this is work we're all doing together. Don't forget, please, that because you are on the commission does not mean you are not part of the community any longer. All of us live here. We live in neighborhoods. We have friends and associates. We are also community representatives, and this is the work that we are asked to do. So thank you for everyone who's been watching this evening. I appreciate it. And please asking everyone in Kalamazoo, please keep your hearts open. It's going to make a big difference. I love you, Kalamazoo. We are adjourned.